The Arizona sun blazed mercilessly over the rocky desert landscape, casting harsh shadows between the towering saguaro cacti and red sandstone formations that defined the territory's unforgiving beauty. Jacob Lone Wolf McKenna crouched behind a boulder, his weathered hands steady as he tracked the mountain lion that had been terrorizing livestock near the settlement of Copper Ridge for weeks. At 41 years old, Jacob had spent most of his adult life as a solitary hunter, earning his living by tracking dangerous predators and providing meat to the scattered communities that dotted the Arizona frontier. His keen gray eyes, sharpened by years of reading animal signs and weather patterns, followed the cat's tracks through the sandy wash below. The lion was clever, doubling back on its trail and using rock outcroppings to mask its scent. But Jacob had been hunting these desert mountains longer than most settlers had been in Arizona. His buckskin clothing, darkened with sweat and dust, blended naturally with the desert colors, and his rifle, a reliable Winchester that had saved his life more times than he could count, rested comfortably in his experienced hands. A sound that didn't belong in the desert stillness caught his attention. Not the hunting cry of a hawk or the skitter of lizards across stone, but something else. Something human and afraid. Jacob froze, every sense alert. In this territory, unexpected sounds could mean Apache raiders, claim jumpers, or worse. He had learned long ago that survival often depended on investigating strange noises rather than ignoring them, even when it meant abandoning a hunt that could bring him $50 from the grateful ranchers of Copper Ridge. Moving silently from boulder to boulder, Jacob worked his way toward the sound, which had resolved itself into the unmistakable crying of a child. What he discovered in a narrow canyon filled him with both alarm and confusion. A Comanche boy, no more than 8 or 9 years old, was trapped on a ledge 15 feet up the canyon wall. The child's buckskin clothing and the distinctive way his black hair was braided marked him clearly as Comanche. But what was a Comanche child doing alone in Apache territory, miles from any known Comanche hunting grounds? Below the ledge, pacing back and forth with predatory patience, was the mountain lion Jacob had been tracking. The big cat had found easier prey than livestock, and it was clear the child had climbed to the ledge to escape, but now couldn't get down without dropping directly into the lion's reach. The boy's face was streaked with tears and dust, his dark eyes wide with terror, but he had stopped crying and was trying to remain still, somehow understanding that movement might trigger the cat's attack instincts. Jacob's mind raced through his options. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to wait for the lion to leave and then help the child down. But mountain lions could wait for days when they had prey cornered, and the boy looked exhausted and dehydrated. The child might fall from the ledge long before the cat gave up, or he might die of thirst and exposure. Every frontier instinct Jacob had developed told him to stay hidden, to not get involved in what could be a complicated situation involving hostile tribes. But looking at the terrified child, he couldn't walk away. Taking careful aim, Jacob positioned himself for a clear shot at the mountain lion. He would have only one chance if he wounded the cat instead of killing it. The enraged animal might turn on him or, worse, find a way to reach the child before Jacob could reload. The boy on the ledge spotted Jacob and their eyes met for a moment. The child didn't call out or make any sound, showing remarkable presence of mind for someone so young. But Jacob could see the desperate hope that flickered in the boy's dark eyes. Jacob squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the canyon like thunder, and the mountain lion dropped instantly, the bullet taking it cleanly through the heart. The sudden silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Jacob's boots on rock as he made his way to the base of the canyon wall. Looking up at the boy, he gestured for him to climb down, making soothing sounds that needed no translation. The child scrambled down the rock face with the natural agility of youth, though Jacob could see his hands were scraped raw from clinging to the stone for what must have been hours. When the boy reached the ground, he stood facing Jacob with dignity that seemed remarkable for his age, though his small body trembled with exhaustion and lingering fear. Jacob offered his water canteen and the child drank gratefully, his dark eyes never leaving Jacob's face. "What's your name, son?" Jacob asked in English, then tried the few Apache words he knew, though he suspected this child spoke neither. The boy responded in rapid Comanche, which Jacob didn't understand, but the tone was clearly one of gratitude. From gestures and the few words that sounded familiar, Jacob gathered that the boy's name was Little Hawk and that he had become separated from his family several days ago. Jacob faced a dilemma. He couldn't leave the child alone in the desert. That would be a death sentence. But bringing a Comanche boy into Copper Ridge would create its own set of problems. The settlers were on edge about Indian raids, and many wouldn't distinguish between a lost child and a potential threat. Still, the nearest army fort was 3 days' ride, and Jacob wasn't sure the boy could survive that journey in his weakened condition. Looking at Little Hawk, who was trying to stay upright despite obvious exhaustion, Jacob made his decision. He would take the boy to Copper Ridge, at least long enough to get him fed and rested. Then he would figure out how to reunite the child with his family. It seemed like a simple plan, an act of basic human decency that any man with a conscience would do. Jacob had no way of knowing that his rescue of Little Hawk would set in motion events that would test every person in Copper Ridge and change the relationship between the settlement and the surrounding tribes forever. As they made their way out of the canyon, Jacob carrying the boy when his small legs gave out, neither of them noticed the lone Comanche warrior, who had been tracking Little Hawk from a distant ridge. The warrior had witnessed the rescue, and as Jacob and the child disappeared toward the settlement, he turned his horse toward the northeast, riding hard toward the main Comanche camp with news that would bring warriors from across the territory, converging on the small town of Copper Ridge. The dusty main street of Copper Ridge had seen its share of unusual arrivals, but nothing quite like the sight of Jacob McKenna walking into town carrying a Comanche child. The settlement, home to about 200 souls scratching out a living from mining, ranching, and trade, fell silent as word spread quickly from person to person. Children playing in the street stopped their games to stare, women gathering laundry hurried inside, and men emerged from shops and saloons to see what was happening. Jacob felt the weight of every gaze as he made his way toward the town's small medical clinic, Little Hawk clinging to his shirt with small fists. The boy was clearly overwhelmed by the sight of so many white faces and buildings, his dark eyes darting nervously from one unfamiliar sight to another. Jacob spoke softly to him in a mixture of English and the few Spanish words that sometimes bridged communication gaps on the frontier, trying to reassure the child that he was safe. Doc Peterson emerged from his clinic before Jacob reached the door, alerted by someone who had run ahead with news of their approach. The elderly physician, one of the few educated men in Copper Ridge, took in the situation with experienced eyes. "Bring him inside, Jacob," Doc said without hesitation. "Looks like he's been through hell." The doctor's calm acceptance of the situation provided a small island of sanity in what Jacob could sense was becoming a volatile moment for the town. Inside the clinic, Doc Peterson examined Little Hawk with gentle efficiency, while Jacob explained how he had found the boy. The child was dehydrated and exhausted, with numerous small cuts and scrapes, but nothing that rest, food, and water couldn't cure. Doc Peterson spoke to Little Hawk in Spanish, and the boy responded with a few words, suggesting he had some contact with Spanish-speaking traders or had picked up fragments of the language. "He'll be fine physically," Doc Peterson told Jacob. "But the question is, what do we do now? Every person in this town is thinking the same thing. If there's one Comanche child here, where are the rest of his people? And are they looking for him?" It was the question Jacob had been dreading but knew they would have to face. He had acted on instinct to save a child's life. But now the practical implications were becoming clear. Word of their arrival had reached Mayor Harrison Walsh, a nervous man who tried to balance the competing interests of his diverse community while keeping everyone alive in a dangerous territory. Walsh arrived at the clinic within minutes, followed by several other town leaders, including Samuel Chen, who ran the general store, and Father Miguel Santos, the Catholic priest who ministered to the settlement's Mexican and mixed heritage families. "McKenna, what in God's name were you thinking bringing him here?" Mayor Walsh demanded, his voice pitched high with anxiety. "We've got families in this town, children who could be put at risk if his people come looking for him with war paint on." The mayor's fear was understandable, given the tensions that existed throughout Arizona territory, but Jacob could see Little Hawk flinch at the harsh tone, even though he couldn't understand the words. Father Santos stepped forward, his weathered face showing compassion rather than fear. "The man saved a child's life, Mayor. Whatever complications that brings, we deal with them as Christians should." The priest knelt beside Little Hawk and spoke to him in Spanish mixed with some Comanche words he had learned from his years ministering on the frontier. The boy responded, and a brief conversation followed. "His name is Little Hawk," Father Santos translated. He says he was hunting with his older brother when they were attacked by Apache raiders 3 days ago. He hid in rocks and lost his brother, then wandered trying to find his way home. He's from a band that camps near the Llano Estacado, at least 100 miles from here. The information provided some context but didn't solve their fundamental problem. Samuel Chen, practical as always, voiced what others were thinking. If Apache raiders attacked them, his people are probably already searching. And when Comanche warriors are looking for a lost child, they don't stop until they find him or know what happened to him. The question is, do we help reunite him with his family or do we wait for them to find us? Before anyone could answer, young Billy Martinez came running into the clinic, his eyes wide with excitement and fear. "Mayor Walsh, you need to see this. There's riders coming from the north, lots of them." The boy's announcement sent a chill through everyone present. Jacob moved to the window and looked out toward the northern approach to town, his heart sinking at what he saw. Dust clouds on the horizon marked the approach of a large group of mounted riders. Even at a distance, Jacob could make out the distinctive silhouettes of Comanche warriors on horseback. As the minutes passed and the riders drew closer, the magnitude of what was approaching became clear. This wasn't a small search party or raiding band. This was a significant gathering of Comanche forces, more than Jacob had ever seen in one place. "Jesus Christ," whispered Mayor Walsh, his face going pale. "There must be 50 of them, maybe more." But as the riders continued to approach and more dust clouds appeared from different directions, it became apparent that 50 was a gross underestimate. Warriors were converging on Copper Ridge from the north, east, and west, their numbers growing by the minute. Father Santos put his hand protectively on Little Hawk's shoulder as the boy moved to the window to see what was happening. When Little Hawk saw the approaching warriors, his face lit up with relief and joy, and he began speaking rapidly in Comanche, pointing toward the riders. It was clear he recognized his people, and his excitement confirmed that this was indeed a rescue party, not a war band bent on destruction, but the sight that greeted the people of Copper Ridge was terrifying regardless of intent. By the time the various groups of warriors had assembled just outside the town's perimeter, their numbers had swollen to nearly 200 mounted Comanche fighters. They arranged themselves in a loose semicircle around the settlement, close enough to make their presence unmistakably clear, but far enough away to avoid appearing immediately threatening. Jacob watched from the clinic window as the townspeople emerged to see what was happening. Fear was written on every face. Children clung to their mothers and men reached for weapons they probably wouldn't have a chance to use if this turned hostile. The sight of 200 Comanche warriors surrounding their small town was the stuff of nightmares for frontier settlements, the kind of thing that happened just before places like Copper Ridge became ghost towns, marked only by burned buildings and unmarked graves. "What do we do now?" Mayor Walsh asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can't fight them and we can't run, and we've got their child." The weight of the situation was crushing. A simple act of mercy had potentially doomed everyone in Copper Ridge, and Jacob felt the responsibility of every life in the settlement pressing down on him like a physical burden. Little Hawk tugged on Jacob's sleeve and pointed toward the warriors, speaking urgently in Comanche. Father Santos listened and translated. "He says his father is out there. The war chief, White Buffalo. He wants to go to them." The information hit the room like a thunderbolt. Little Hawk wasn't just any Comanche child. He was the son of one of the most respected and feared war chiefs in the territory. Jacob had unknowingly rescued the son of White Buffalo, a man whose name was spoken with equal parts respect and terror across the Southwest. The implications were staggering. If something happened to Little Hawk while he was in Copper Ridge, White Buffalo's revenge would be swift and absolute. But if they simply handed the boy over, would the warriors leave peacefully, or was there more to this gathering than a simple rescue mission? Jacob looked at the faces around him and realized that everyone in the room was thinking the same thing. Their actions in the next few hours would determine whether Copper Ridge survived this day or became another cautionary tale told around campfires on the frontier. The next few hours passed in tense silence as the people of Copper Ridge watched the Comanche warriors maintain their positions around the town. The warriors made no aggressive moves, but their presence was a constant reminder that the settlement existed only at their sufferance. Jacob had positioned himself at the clinic window, watching for any sign of what might come next. While Little Hawk grew increasingly restless, clearly wanting to return to his people. As the sun reached its zenith, a single warrior rode forward from the main group, stopping just within shouting distance of the town center. He was an imposing figure, tall and proud in his saddle, his war paint and ceremonial dress marking him as a chief. Even at a distance, his presence commanded respect and attention. Father Santos, who had more experience with Comanche customs than anyone else in town, immediately recognized the significance of this approach. "That's White Buffalo himself," the priest said quietly to the assembled town leaders. "Little Hawk's father. He's coming forward under a flag of truce. See the white feathers in his lance? He wants to talk, not fight, but he's also making it clear that he has the power to destroy this place if the talks don't go well." The sight of the legendary war chief sent a ripple of fear through the townspeople, who had gathered to watch. But it also offered the first real hope for a peaceful resolution. Mayor Walsh looked around nervously. "Someone has to go out there and talk to him, but who? I don't speak Comanche, and I'm not sure my Spanish is good enough for something this important." The mayor's limitations were obvious to everyone, and it became clear that the responsibility would fall to someone else. Father Santos volunteered, his years of frontier experience and language skills making him the logical choice. But Jacob stepped forward. "I'll go," Jacob said firmly. "I'm the one who brought the boy here. This is my responsibility." The truth was, Jacob felt the weight of every life in Copper Ridge on his shoulders. His decision to save Little Hawk had created this situation, and he felt obligated to see it through regardless of the personal risk. Father Santos could come along to help with translation, but Jacob needed to be the one to face White Buffalo. Little Hawk seemed to understand what was happening and grabbed Jacob's hand, speaking urgently in Comanche. Father Santos translated, "He wants to come with you. He's telling his father that you saved his life, that you're a good man who protected him." The child's endorsement might be crucial in the coming negotiation, but Jacob hesitated to bring Little Hawk into what could become a dangerous situation. After quick consultation with Father Santos and Doc Peterson, they decided that Little Hawk should accompany them. The boy's presence would demonstrate that he was unharmed and well treated, and his own words to his father might carry more weight than any explanation the adults could provide. With Little Hawk walking between Jacob and Father Santos, the small delegation made their way slowly toward where White Buffalo waited. As they approached, Jacob could see the war chief more clearly. White Buffalo was a man in his 40s, his face marked with the scars of countless battles and his bearing radiating the authority of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions. His horse, a magnificent painted stallion, stood perfectly still as the three figures approached. The chief's dark eyes took in every detail of the approaching group, but his face remained impassive. When they were within conversing distance, Little Hawk ran forward with a cry of joy, reaching up toward his father. White Buffalo's stern expression softened momentarily as he reached down to touch his son's face. Speaking to him rapidly in Comanche, the boy responded excitedly, gesturing back toward Jacob and clearly telling his father about the rescue. Jacob waited, his heart pounding as the reunion played out before him. After listening to his son, White Buffalo turned his attention to Jacob and Father Santos. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear, marking him as a leader who had dealt with white settlers and officials before. "My son tells me you saved his life," White Buffalo said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. "He says you killed the mountain cat that would have eaten him, gave him water, brought him to safety." Jacob nodded, unsure how to respond to such a direct statement. He was in trouble. Any man would have done the same. White Buffalo studied Jacob for a long moment as if measuring him. "No," the chief said finally. "Not any man. Many of your people would have left a Comanche child to die. You chose differently. This creates a debt." The concept of debt in Comanche culture was complex, as Father Santos knew from his years of experience with various tribes. A debt of honor was a serious matter that created obligations on both sides. White Buffalo continued, "But it also creates a problem. My son was taken by Apache raiders while hunting with his brother. We have been searching for 3 days, following tracks, asking questions of every person we could find. When our scouts saw him with you, some of my warriors thought he had been captured." Jacob felt his stomach clench. "I never captured him. I found him trapped by that mountain lion and brought him to town to get him help. I was planning to find a way to return him to his people. White Buffalo nodded slowly. I believe you. My son's words confirm this. But my warriors have gathered from many bands to search for Little Hawk. They came expecting to fight for him if necessary. Now they find he is safe, but they are still here, still ready for war. The implications of White Buffalo's words became clear. The gathered warriors weren't just from Little Hawk's immediate band. They represented a coalition of Comanche groups who had come together for what they thought would be a rescue mission. Now that they were assembled, simply disbanding and going home might not be simple, especially if some of the war leaders felt their honor demanded action. What do you want from us? Jacob asked directly, preferring to know where he stood rather than guess at the chief's intentions. White Buffalo was silent for a moment, then spoke carefully. You saved my son's life. This means you are under my protection, you and your family, but Copper Ridge has been built on land where my people have hunted for generations. Your settlement blocks access to water sources our horses need. Your miners scare away game our families depend on, Father. Santos understood immediately that this was about more than just Little Hawk. White Buffalo was using the gathering of warriors and the debt of honor created by Jacob's rescue to address larger issues that had been building for months. The chief continued. Some of my war leaders say this is the time to drive out all white settlers to reclaim our hunting grounds before more towns appear. Others say we should try to find a way to share the land. Your actions today will help determine which path we choose. The weight of the moment pressed down on Jacob. He had saved one child, but now the fate of an entire settlement hung in the balance. White Buffalo was essentially offering a choice. Find a way for the Comanche and the townspeople to coexist, or face the consequences of continued expansion into tribal lands. It was a test that would determine not just the future of Copper Ridge, but the relationship between two very different ways of life. What kind of arrangement would work? Jacob asked, knowing he was negotiating for far more than his own life. White Buffalo looked back toward his assembled warriors, then toward the town where frightened faces watched from windows and doorways. That is what we must decide together. But decide quickly. My warriors will not wait forever, and some grow impatient for action. The negotiations that followed were unlike anything Copper Ridge had ever experienced. White Buffalo agreed to bring 5 of his war leaders into the town to meet with the settlement's leadership, while the majority of his warriors remained in position around the perimeter. The meeting was arranged in the town's largest building, the community hall where dances and town meetings were held, with Jacob serving as an unofficial mediator, despite his lack of experience in such matters. The sight of Comanche war chiefs sitting across a rough wooden table from the town's leaders was surreal. Mayor Walsh, still nervous but trying to project authority, sat beside Samuel Chen and Father Santos. Doc Peterson joined them, his medical expertise having earned him respect among many frontier communities, including some tribal groups. Across from them sat White Buffalo and 4 other chiefs, their war paint and ceremonial dress a stark contrast to the plain clothing of the townspeople. Little Hawk had been reunited with other members of his family who had arrived with the warriors, but he kept returning to Jacob's side, apparently feeling a bond with the man who had saved him. His presence served as a constant reminder of what had brought these 2 groups together, but also of how quickly the situation could change if the negotiations failed. White Buffalo spoke first, his words translated by Father Santos when needed. We have lived on this land since our grandfathers' grandfathers were young men. We know every water hole, every game trail, every place where the grass grows thick for our horses. Your town sits on one of the most important water sources in this territory. In dry years, our horses and cattle depend on this water to survive. The complaint was one that resonated with the townspeople, who also depended on the same water source. Samuel Chen responded carefully. We understand the water is important to your people. It's important to us too. But we've built our homes here, our businesses. We have children who were born here. This is our home now. The tension in the room was palpable as both sides stated their positions. One of the other chiefs, a younger man whose scars and bearing marked him as a veteran of many conflicts, spoke angrily in Comanche. White Buffalo listened, then translated. Stone Bear says your people take everything and leave nothing. The miners dig holes that poison the water downstream. The ranchers fence off grazing areas our horses have used for generations. He says talking is useless, that only force will make you understand. Jacob could see the fear in Mayor Walsh's eyes, and he knew they were close to a breaking point. But he also remembered White Buffalo's earlier words about debt and honor. "Chief White Buffalo," Jacob said, standing up slowly, "you said I was under your protection because I saved your son. Does that protection extend to the people who helped me care for him? Doc Peterson, who treated his injuries, Father Santos, who gave him food and water, the people of this town who didn't harm him even though they were afraid?" It was a calculated gamble, trying to expand the concept of the debt to cover the entire settlement. White Buffalo considered this carefully, speaking briefly with the other chiefs in Comanche. When he turned back to the table, his expression was thoughtful. "You ask me to extend protection to your entire town based on one act of kindness. This is unprecedented, but my son is alive because you chose to help him rather than ignore him. This does create obligations." The younger chief, Stone Bear, clearly disagreed with this interpretation, arguing heatedly with White Buffalo in their own language. The discussion became animated, with other chiefs joining in, and Jacob realized he was witnessing a debate about policy that would affect not just Copper Ridge but the entire relationship between the Comanche and white settlers in the region. Finally, White Buffalo held up his hand for silence. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of final authority. "We will offer Copper Ridge a choice. You can continue as you are and face the consequences of expanding into our territory without permission, or you can enter into an agreement that recognizes our rights to this land while allowing you to remain." Mayor Walsh leaned forward anxiously. What kind of agreement? The terms White Buffalo outlined were complex but fair. The town would pay an annual tribute in goods and supplies, particularly tools, weapons, and horses. In return, the Comanche would guarantee safe passage for trade wagons, protection from Apache raids, and access to hunting and trading opportunities that could benefit both communities. Most importantly, the settlement would serve as a neutral meeting ground where disputes could be resolved through negotiation rather than violence. White Buffalo explained, "There will be more towns, more settlers coming to this territory. We cannot stop this, but we can try to control how it happens. Copper Ridge can be the first place where our peoples learn to live near each other without constant war." The proposal was ambitious and risky for both sides. The townspeople would be accepting a form of tributary relationship with the Comanche, something that went against their understanding of American sovereignty. The Comanche would be agreeing to limit their own responses to encroachment, trusting that negotiation could achieve what warfare might accomplish more directly. Samuel Chen raised practical concerns. "How do we know other Comanche bands will honor this agreement? How do we know the territorial government will accept it?" White Buffalo's response was honest. "You don't. This is an experiment. It may succeed or it may fail. But the alternative is certain conflict, and in that conflict many will die on both sides." The debate within the town leadership was intense but brief. They could see the assembled warriors outside, could understand that their options were limited. After a quick vote, Mayor Walsh announced their acceptance of White Buffalo's terms. The agreement would be formalized with a ceremony the following morning, and the various Comanche bands would then disperse to their normal territories. That evening, as both communities prepared for the unprecedented ceremony, Jacob found himself sitting outside the clinic with Little Hawk, who had insisted on staying close to his rescuer. Father Santos joined them, translating as the boy told Jacob about his family, his horse, and his dreams of becoming a great hunter like his father. "You know what you've done, don't you?" Father Santos asked Jacob quietly. "You've changed the course of history in this territory. This agreement, if it works, could be the model for how settlers and tribes coexist across the West." Jacob looked at the boy beside him and thought about the simple decision to save a child from a mountain lion. "I just did what seemed right at the time. Everything else just followed from that." The ceremony the next morning was witnessed by nearly every person in Copper Ridge and hundreds of Comanche warriors. White Buffalo and Mayor Walsh exchanged gifts, spoke words of commitment to the agreement, and shook hands in a gesture that bridged two very different cultures. Little Hawk presented Jacob with a small carved wooden hawk, a token that would mark him as a friend of the Comanche for the rest of his life. As the various warrior bands prepared to leave, White Buffalo approached Jacob one final time. "You saved my son, and in doing so you may have saved many lives on both sides. But remember, this peace we have made must be tended like a fire. It will require constant attention from good people on both sides, or it will die out." Jacob nodded. understanding that his role in this historic agreement was just beginning. In the months and years that followed, the Copper Ridge Accords, as they came to be known, would face many tests. There would be misunderstandings, violations by individuals on both sides, and pressure from territorial authorities who didn't approve of negotiating with tribes. But the foundation laid by Jacob's simple act of mercy and White Buffalo's wisdom would endure, creating the first successful treaty between a frontier town and the Comanche nation. Little Hawk grew up to become a bridge between the two communities, serving as a translator and diplomat who helped resolve dozens of potential conflicts. Jacob never returned to his solitary life as a hunter, instead becoming Copper Ridge's official liaison with the Comanche, a role that suited his temperament and honored the debt that had started it all. The story of how a lone hunter's decision to save one child led to a revolutionary agreement between enemies became legend throughout the Southwest, proof that individual acts of courage and compassion could change the course of history. And in Copper Ridge, where Comanche and white children eventually played together in the streets, people would point to the small wooden hawk that Jacob kept on his mantle and remember that the greatest victories sometimes come not from fighting, but from choosing to help when help is needed most.